Hopefully that's working.
All right. Oh, there's microphones too. I think there's some. We have to share one.
We'll pass.
Well, thanks again. Thanks again, everyone, for coming out. Thanks again for everyone for coming out. We appreciate it. So we have a great lineup here tonight. Angela with TD Ameritrade, Michelle with the American Red Cross, Tim with Travelers, and Brandon with Skilled Creative. So we just have a few questions we're going to walk through, and then we'll open it up to the audience and all. So maybe, I did that really quick intro. If you guys want to just do your own little 30 seconds, real fast.
Well, good evening. I'm Angela, and I've worked on integrations with TD Ameritrade's chatbots for Facebook, Apple, Twitter, oh, what do you know, I forget now, WeChat, and I can't remember the other one. Alexa, there we go.
Hello, okay. Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Molinax. I'm the product and UX lead for the American Red Cross, so anything bot related is under my purview. Right now we have use cases that touch Dialogflow and Louise/Q&A Maker for web-based chatbots, as well as Alexa skills, and we're moving into Google Actions from there.
Hi, I'm Tim Carlson, Travelers Insurance. So I have enterprise accountability for all the work we're doing in the chatbot and voice assistant space. So a slew of use cases, both external and internal, we'll talk about.
Hi, Brandon. Hello. Brandon Kaplan with Skilled Creative. We're an agency here in New York, focused on emerging technologies, but very largely focused on voice and all conversational interfaces. Working with brands like Pepsi, Pfizer, FanDuel, Simon & Schuster, Wall Street Journal. So CPG organizations, media, education, entertainment.
Great. Well, once again, thanks everyone for being part of the panel. Just to kick it off, you mentioned very highly the use cases. Could you chat a little bit about what types of use cases you're building for? Are they for your own company, or why you guys are building?
So our use cases are customer service and information. Most times we're looking at intercepting customer service calls, right? Pretty straightforward. I am in the financial services space, so it goes without saying that I'm very highly regulated. All of our content is meant to be both informative and helpful. We do have authenticated experiences allowing you to trade on all of our chatbots and also on Alexa, which is interesting in the financial space because security is frightening, right? We're talking about people's financial well-being. And so we have to be very conscientious about how our users feel. We have to be very conscientious about how they read and understand. And in addition, we are also looking at use cases in China, Hong Kong, and US Chinese domestic clients. So we're looking at use cases for clients that speak both languages and have the ability to switch languages, right? How many of you speak two languages? Your brain flops back and forth all the time. So all of our use cases, again, are for client service and information, both logged in and logged out experiences.
Cool, so the American Red Cross, very old, very large organization, right? We're in the nonprofit space. And it's hard for us to come up with one single category in which we would put all of our bots, right? Because the scope of the work at the Red Cross is so wide. We have blood donations, we have humanitarian services, so disaster relief, service to the armed forces, training services, that type of thing. So when we look at our bots, there are three things that we look at just from a categorical sense, right? The mission. Is the bot helping to serve the mission in some sort of substantive way? Or is it helping us to reach our end customers to deliver the services that we're meant to serve in a more efficient fashion? Two is automation, so cost savings, and revenue. So are we able to, for example, schedule more blood donations or find a way to bring in more financial donations? So moving the needle either up or down, and across the board, are we delivering the mission in a more effective way? We do have some use cases that are already out in the public, ready for consumption. Blood donation, so how are we able to allow users to schedule their blood donation more effectively and save some cost over on the scheduling side? It's very expensive to schedule those donations from the administrative lens. First aid, which is teaching people about first aid safety, things like that, so mission delivery, as well as hurricane alerts, which again is mission delivery. We have a couple of internal use cases as well, and there's not a lot of common thread among them other than those three things. So we have the joy, if you will, of being able to be driven by that mission when we think of these cool use cases.
So in the insurance space, everyone has insurance, not always the best to deal with. You think about kind of the life cycle of, you buy insurance, you want to do things to your policy, or you get in an accident and you need to file a claim. Traditionally hasn't been a great experience for customers. So I think the big picture thing we're going after is, how do we reduce friction in the system? How do we make it easier to get information on demand, to do things on demand that you just can't do today? So we're really focused on the customer from that standpoint. A lot of our internal use cases are focused on getting information for our employees quicker. Very large company, spread into a number of different business units. So how do we, sometimes question, a lot of it's kind of tribal knowledge right now, is going and trying to ping their friend on Skype and get an answer. So it's how do we open that up and get information quicker to people?
Yeah, and because we're an agency, we work with clients across a pretty wide range of different channels. We're fortunate. We feel a little schizophrenic sometimes because you're looking for strategic approaches for all your different clients. But we're fortunate because, sometimes we'll be approaching it from a very utilitarian perspective. Sometimes it's about consumer engagement. Sometimes it's about brand awareness. Sometimes it's very strictly about conversions and sales. And so we get to kind of run the gamut in terms of whatever strategic approach we need to apply for our clients' purposes. But overall, what we're trying to do with our partners is define use cases for them that will stand out on the platforms. It will be a unique value proposition for them that will get that initial engagement, that will have value, that can create some type of retention, return engagement, loyalty for them. So that they're not allocating resources for kind of a one-off use case. They create something that brings value for the brand and for their customers, consumers.
Great. You guys mentioned cost savings, more effective ways to communicate or get donations and sign up, quicker interaction with users, doing things that stand out for the clients. Are there any particular use cases you think work really well for, say, a text-based chatbot versus a voice, Alexa type of skill? Ones that work better?
Yeah, I would say, for us, we treat ourselves, we're kind of a voice-first agency. So I'd say most of the work that we're doing is first in the voice space, because a lot of the work we're doing is consumer-facing. We just feel that the platform, the momentum of the platform is pretty amazing. You've got massive distribution. It's on people's counters, it's at their bedsides, and it's there. There's a layer of friction reduced, so people can speak to the device and get the experience immediately versus taking a phone out of their pocket, clicking through a couple times. However, we think that there are use cases where we need to escalate to a chatbot when it becomes a very visual, or you need a carousel, you need buttons, you need to input a lot of information. And there's a lot of use cases where a chatbot should be the first use case. If it's like a lot of personal information, it's complex inputs. So we're traditionally voice first, but there's a lot of ways that we escalate to chat or we go chat first for utility.
Yeah, and I'd say with some of these cases we're looking at, not necessarily deployed. We think about kind of first notice of loss, you're reporting a claim, and you might have to give 15 pieces of information. So not always going to be a great voice experience. So those are the types of things that we're thinking more chatbot focused. From the voice space, I think it'd be more things that it's just kind of immediate. Want to send me my auto ID card? Want to when's my bill due? What's my deductible? Things like that where you can just kind of get immediate responses back. So we're not looking to build these complex flows necessarily in the voice space. Maybe more chat focused.
I would say that we have a similar way of thinking about it. We're lucky in that we can be medium and channel agnostic. We can take our simple use case and then apply it to whatever happens to make sense. And if it makes sense on one and not the other, fine, that's the direction that we'll take. And in our experience, like they said, anything very visual or complex, lots of text, obviously makes sense in a chatbot. Anything that's very focused and transactional would make sense in a voice skill. One of the things that I have to do within my own organization, everyone's very excited about bots as a whole. So they think of a single use case and oh great, can we put it on Alexa? Well, no, right? It may not make sense on that channel if the conversation itself is too complex, too deep, and you have to give the user too much detail, right? Skills, short and sweet. We actually had a conversation this morning about volunteers. It can be difficult to take a potential volunteer and move them through that system of where they actually onboard as a volunteer. And why it's tempting to say, oh, Alexa is the next hot thing, Google Actions, maybe we can ping them an alert, right, so they can sign up to become a volunteer. That doesn't really make sense, right, because you don't look at a job description or hear somebody read a job description to you. That is solidly a chatbot use case. So we try to look at the depth of the experience to see which one is actually the best fit there and then have the discipline to go in that direction.
Right, so it's very much true, right? We look at it as entertainment and information for voice, snackable moments, but also we're looking at the use cases of the elderly because, again, financial services, right? You've retired, and I have this one story. I listened to the call center because, again, one of our goals is cost reduction. Right? We're trying to be that intersection right before you have to call. And I'm listening to this client interview, and we say, how do you interact with us? He says, I call you all the time. And we say, why don't you log in? Right? Like, you're weird. Everybody wants to log in. Nobody wants to call, really. He goes, because I take care of my wife, and she's had dementia for the last 5 years. And when I call you to get a status or find out how my account is doing or perform a trade, then she feels like I'm talking to her. Right? And I was like, well, okay, well, we better build our Alexa better. Because that's what he's looking for, right? So we're looking at use cases that empower our investors to do more things than just purchase or buy something, right? They're looking at their own well-being, and so we take a look at that as well as both the entertainment, hey, I can get a quick fun update like you would listen to a podcast, but also get those quick pieces of information that you wouldn't be able to do if you couldn't see or you couldn't take the time to log in. For the chatbot stuff, same thing, complicated data, you want to scan it, you don't want to wait to listen.
I'm going to use that snackable moments.
Yeah. It's all great. It sounds like the more questions you have or personal information, those kind of things, you want to move more to a chatbot. That kind of leads to the next set of questions here. Is how do you develop for conversational interfaces? Are there any best practices, say, for chatbots versus voice? How do you go?
So on that thread of listening to that phone call, right? If you've ever done your user experience testing, you're sitting there, and if you ever look back and you close your eyes and you say, "What did they say 3 minutes ago?" No idea. It's the same kind of thing. You're thinking about how far can we actually, as humans, retain any piece of information, right? We're talking about as product owners and managers, we're looking at the scale and the memory of retaining all of this content. You don't need to retain 15, 20 minutes of a conversation, just because as humans we don't retain 15 to 20 minutes of everything we just said, right? So understanding how long a conversation is, an interaction, a piece of information that you need, and then really focusing in on that goal and that need.
One thing I would avoid is assuming that the channels themselves are not unique. So one of the mistakes that we are trying to avoid, but that we've also seen recommended to us by different agencies, is treating a chatbot the same as a skill in terms of conversation design. I'm a firm believer that they have distinct experiences. You don't type to a chatbot the same way you would speak to your Alexa, nor is it the same of how you would call into the phone, right, with an IVR experience. So even though we have powerful tools like Dashbot or other platforms that give us the ability to use like Dialogflow, for example, across all of these different mediums, the experience themselves, how you write the interaction model, should be unique to that particular medium. And then you have an opportunity to actually test against that user experience effectively.
A couple pieces of advice I would say. One would be just starting small. To begin to a lot of these conversations with the business, and they want to do a lot of different things. And then they make kind of big assumptions where, yeah, we're going to say this, and they're going to say this, then we're going to say this, and they get down like 10 paths. I'm like, well, unless they go down that one happy path, we probably just built something that's not really going to work very well. The other thing is, I wouldn't assume that the process you have today with your company is something you can just put into a chatbot. So I guess my story would be we're building out something for like loss consultation. So someone comes in and we ask a bunch of questions, and today we call on the phone. It's like 7 yes or no answers. So we actually built that, got built into a chatbot, and had a couple of the business leaders go through it, and it's like, oh, I hit no like 7 times in a row, and it was like so frustrating. Like, what's this? Like, why do we build this? Like, well, it's our process today. So I think it's really understanding that these channels are different, and they might need some different process tweaks, and there's probably things we can't change due to legal or regulatory, but it's something you need to look at and understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a given that you're going to do a lot of kind of checking yourself, user testing, focus grouping, reading through your scripts, making sure it's a good flow. But the 2 things that we really check against are, one is the user journey that we've created, the scripting. Is it progressive and is it contextual, right? So if somebody comes back a number of times, your retention's great, but you need to make sure that the conversation progresses with them and they're not getting the same long introduction, and you understand how many times they've been there before and what they've done before. These are tools that are at our disposal, and it needs to be in the same vein, very contextual. For at what point did they enter into the conversation? So progression and context, very important. And from a creative perspective, because we're a creative agency, we have a lot of really fun, smart, creative people around. They really get into it. Like, we love what we do, but we always want to check ourselves and say, is this a creative experience that services the user experience, or is this self-indulgence, right? And every single time that we've been self-indulgent and we've put too much copy in or too many witty remarks, and we end up confusing people, and you lose completion rates, right? So make sure that context is right, but also make sure you're making a really great experience, but you're not putting too much self-indulgence into it.
Fair enough. I know with the first Alexa skill I made, it was just, if someone asked me about Dashbot in an email, I would send a sentence or 2, but as an Alexa skill, that was way too long, and I was saying stuff, so we often able to be concise. Or folks might, I mentioned this to someone earlier, one person plays the Alexa while the other person, talks to it, and you kind of act it out. The other thing we've seen a few times is former screenwriters or script writers getting into the conversational UI space. Do any of you guys work with folks like that or employed?
So we have writers that are dedicated to it, but it's been actually a journey to level them out of their box, because they're not screenwriters, they're financial services writers. Not that fun. But they get really into it. They're like, oh, wow, I can do that now? So it's more like that.
I don't, but I wish I did. That would be great. So from a product lens, my team really holds the reins on all of the conversation design, and a significant portion of our day is spent, pushing back on the business, saying, I know this is what the website says, I know this is what the FDA says that we should say in this particular way, but we have to change, right, what the response is, how the flow actually is to be conversation friendly, otherwise the bot will fail, the use case will fail. So conversation design and being creative and having elegance in that conversation is definitely a priority for us, but it's challenging. And this isn't quite the same as being creative, but one resource that I think would be really helpful is some sort of linguist or somebody who can help us with training data when it's very important that we have high levels of accuracy across the country. So if you go down to the south, right, and start to ask them how they talk about storms, for example, so the context of disaster response, they're going to speak about it in radically different verbiage than we would in the Northeast or in California, things like that. And that's not something that our team would just inherently know, nor would somebody at the organization inherently know. Some sort of expertise to help us with that training data.
Yeah, it's evolution, right? So we have a lot of content writers. I think so. The first chatbot and scripts we rolled out, you actually couldn't read the whole message because you had to scroll down. So we're basically taking us from the website and putting it in the box. So yeah, I think it's just going through and learning some of those lessons. I kind of mentioned the 7 or 8 yeses or no's. So I think it's going through that, and we are kind of evolving and bringing in new people, retraining people who have been in more traditional roles to this more content writer, conversational writer.
We've worked with screenwriters. It's great. They have a really they're elegant with their words. But we've also had a lot of luck operating mostly out of New York, but also in LA, working with comedians.
Yeah.
Because comedians really understand a punchline, they get timing, they have kind of honed their skills in that regard. So finding people that really know when to push and pull on a conversation is really key for us.
So one thing with any new platform, user acquisition and discovery is often a challenge. So how are users finding out about the chatbots and skills you all have, or how are you going about trying to acquire users?
Marketing. So a lot of our users are, about the big breadth of them are in their 40s or older. We go to these educational conferences, right, and we like taking engineers with us, and we have a lot of fun with our clients. And half the time, they need to learn how to open their messages app because they forgot where it is. Some of the things that we need to teach people are just to think of chatbots or conversational bots as talking to a friend, right? Hey, just chat with us like you would your friend. And they're like, oh, I can do that? Yeah, you can do that. So it's the acquisition. Some of it is actually just the mind shift, and then the rest is making it easy to find and available for them, and then giving them the next thing to do, right? So don't just be like, hi, and walk away, right? You want to build that conversational flow. You want to give them that next thing to do. You want to help them along. So acquire, first it's discovery, but then it's acquiring, and then it's retention.
So the different use cases we have, most of them are external, so public facing and marketing, right? One of the challenges that we have is some of the use cases that we've already launched. They're brand new, right? So only a matter of weeks ago, and we're still sort of studying what that adoption behavior is looking like and seeing where we can go from there. So TBD on adoption. One of the challenges that we have at our organization is that our scope of what we do at the Red Cross is very wide, right? Which on one hand means that we have a lot of opportunity for different use cases that could really move the needle. The challenge is that we have a lot of marketing noise. So how are we going to fit into the calendar of Red Cross communications when there's a donation appeal for blood, a donation appeal for fundraising dollars, that type of thing? Or if there's a disaster, forget about it. There's no time to promote an Alexa skill. We have to solicit donations for whatever national disaster is happening across the country. So marketing is a challenge for us. One thing that we're exploring is, looking at those early adopters. Bots are very new in the nonprofit space. There really isn't anyone who's doing anything substantive in that area. We're the first, which is great. So we have to rely on networks like this, folks who are excited about chatbots. And what's good is that we have a lot of brand equity just by being the American Red Cross, so we can sort of ride that wave as we start to encourage adoption. On the other side of the fence, our internal bots, they're sort of like sitting ducks, right? You can just send an email to 20,000 people and say, hey, here's this cool chatbot that's going to solve all of your problems. Would you like to use it? So once we launch, we hope to have that be a little bit easier than some of our public-facing bots.
Do you do that?
Would we email them?
Do you email 20,000 people and say they use this?
Oh, I will.
I don't know if you actually do that.
Oh, no. So we have different communications for everyone in the organization, and we will not hesitate to use that for this bot.
Every time we've had a company email, it's usually an accident, something and it gets 800 reply alls and crashes all the email systems. So.
Oh no, I get to ride the wave of that weekly email.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we have little intranet site for us, so we're going to spam them as much as is reasonable.
Okay. We actually haven't done a lot of marketing. So we announced a partnership with Amazon, I think third quarter last year, and with that, we rolled out a couple of our skills. So if you're a traveler's consumer, actually, the public, we have a skill if you're not a traveler's customer. But I think we've kind of purposely, toned down the marketing. We want to get something out there that's actually pretty good or feel confident about. Even to the fact that we've created a brand, we have a name out there. But when we roll our first one out to chatbot, we're probably going to use it. We're probably going to just see how the public reacts to it, see how questions and answers. So we're taking a little bit of a conservative approach from that standpoint. But I think once we feel confident and feel like we roll out a good product, we'll definitely start to blast it to the more general public. We don't want to end up on Facebook. I mean, one of the horror stories. There's actually some people who work with, used to be in like social media, that you don't want to be that company that, someone posts on, hey, just reported my claim, and they said, oh, like great, or like something like, so you see a lot of stories out there, like screen caps of chatbots, so we're trying to like avoid that type of thing.
I mean, we're an agency, so when we work with a partner, a large part of our job is to get it out there. We're tasked with that. So, I mean, this isn't like a mysterious new platform that there's going to be some weird, it's the same as anything else. You have to market it, like it's marketing. So we lean on the platforms as much as we possibly can. It doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 50 brand or you're a small champion winner or a small skill builder. You can build relationships with Amazon and Google, and you can lean on them when you're launching, give them enough lead time and say, hey, I'm launching this thing, here's my traction, here's my reviews. Amazon will promote you, and there's a lot of channels to do that, whether it's on the website, in their emails, and social media, on the screens of the Echo Show. So lean on the platforms, and then you have to put together a robust marketing plan. And if you're a large organization, then leverage your own properties as much as you possibly can. If you're a small organization, create a strategic social media initiative. There are no viral skills or chatbots right now, so you have to really be strategic in your targeting. And for us, it always goes back to context. If it's a chatbot, we think about highly visual, clickable placement. If it's a voice experience, it needs to be really well-placed wake phrases for people. And there is an SEO element to voice as well, where you can turn certain tools on the platforms. And if you ask about, what's the best beer to pair with chicken, a beer company should be vying for those types of phrases. So there's an opportunity for every element of traditional marketing, but you can lean on the platforms as well, lean on your own properties, and just have a plan and execute it.
One of the things we heard from a previous panel, from some of the panelists, they were using social media or YouTube videos because it's relatively new. Folks might not know how to interact with the chatbot or the voice skills, so seeing this video of someone doing it helps, and they also influencers, so they had reach. That was kind of interesting. And then there was one that was more of a hack. I forget what company it was, but they went into Reddit and put all these Easter eggs into their skill to get people to try the skill, and then it kind of continued there. But it's kind of neat stuff. So do you guys ever talk to your end users to find out what they actually think about the Alexa skills or your voice skills or chatbots? And how are your users? What do they think about what you guys are building, if you do survey?
So back to those conferences, I actually just went to one on Saturday, and they're adorable. Really, they are. Some of them, right, I told you about the gentleman who we interviewed to find out what use cases would fit for him. But we also talk to clients who come and they ask us for help setting up, right? They don't know how to use the thing. And some of it is our own associates, people who are working in branches who are client-facing, they don't know how to use it, so we have to educate them as well. But a lot of it is reading transcripts, looking at the analytics, looking at the data, looking at the kinds of calls we get from the call center to see what people are actually asking and or needing. And then using my friends as guinea pigs, right? So I'll just hand them something, or we'll do the same thing with clients. Just straight up user testing at a conference. We just hand it to them and we see what they say, how they react, how they feel. And most of the time, thankfully so far, they're like, oh, this is okay. I could maybe get used to this, right? And other times it freaks them out. It's scary. I mean, they don't understand. They have to take a leap. But most of the time, I think it's just watching them and being patient, and analytics, of course.
So as far as getting user feedback, there are 3 things that we focus on. And this actually, I forgot to mention this as far as marketing. We have thousands of volunteers, right? It's pretty integral to our infrastructure, these volunteers. So making sure that those volunteers and very involved donors, those who go to a blood drive every single time that they become eligible to donate, those who are very sticky to our brand, making sure that they are bought in to these chatbots and voice skills. So we do a lot of testing with them, getting their initial reactions, seeing what that user behavior looks like, just giving it to them, turning it on, seeing what the reaction is. And that's great, because if they're not bought in, right, we have a problem. On the other hand, they're not necessarily indicative of what the general public's behavior would be, right? Because they're already bought into the Red Cross brand. So the second thing we look at are looking at interviews and observing behavior of those who have never seen the products before. And we do that in two ways. You know, me just going to people and saying, hey, would you like to check out this chatbot or this voice skill, and doing the old-fashioned user interviews from product management. But then also leveraging vendors to help us do that. We do a lot of UAT with a group called Applause that, you know, goes out across the country, across the world, and sources testers that don't have any particular bias. And while that's, you know, feedback that you need to use with a grain of salt, it's very effective for us to be able to get a lot of feedback very quickly and help us iterate from there. And then I guess that's about it. Yeah, but that's something that we very much look at all the time.
Yeah, I think indirectly we have a lot of data. So people are calling in, we're handling hundreds of thousands of calls. We have, you know, person-to-person chats, we're looking at those transcripts. So we have a lot of data to start with. As we built, when we built the Alexa skills, we do have a number of employees who are also travelers customers, so we did do some internal testing and just get on the device and say, hey, go interact with this, like, and got some feedback from that regard. With some of our internal use cases as well, we just rolled out, and people kind of across the country, maybe not necessarily in technology roles, or like underwriters, operations. Hey, use this. What would you use it for? Do you have trouble with the system? Can answer some of your questions. Like, what would you ask? So we got some good feedback that way.
I can think of 3 really good tools. Just like Applause, there's another company called Pulse Labs, and they have a self-serve platform that you can use. They're really good, and the reports come back and really good insights. Sometimes it hurts you personally because you thought you wrote something really fun and creative and they didn't like the flow, so you change it. So before you launch doing the user testing, after you launch, from the time that we launch an experience, we say it's like a 4-month phase. Our launch is a 4-month phase, right? It's the first month, let's get it out there, let's create the initial traffic, let's start looking at the data from that first month, let's see what were our completion rates, what were people clicking on, what were the most popular intents, where were we missing things. A very valuable tool set in the Amazon platform called Fallback Intent, where you can see what people are asking for, querying against that you didn't have in your skill. So we look at those analytics, and then the analytics from a user test before launch is important, but for us it's even more important after launch. We take the data from the first month, iterate on the second month, prove in the second and the third month that we've improved all those metrics, and in the fourth month pour the marketing dollars on top of it to really scale. And that fallback intent that I mentioned, if you're building voice, is really, really key because you see some really strange stuff in there. An example that we did for Entertainment Weekly that launched just a few weeks ago, a lot of people were asking for volume up, and volume up on that platform errors you out. So we went in and we wrote an error message to handle it, an error handle, and it fixed it, and we didn't have all that loss in completion rates. So doing user testing before and analytics after.
Where do you guys all see chatbots and voice skills going in the future? Like, where do you see this leading to? Any predictions for the future? Or I can add to it. It's what do you think needs to occur for the chatbots and voice skills to take off more?
Yeah, we're really passionate about this. So we think the platforms are really nascent still. So for us, speaking again to a voice-first agency, Alexa, less so Google because it runs on Google. Amazon runs on Bing, which is obviously not Google. We think there's a content issue with Alexa right now. So how often do you ask a question that says, sorry, I don't know that? And then every time that happens to a user, we're running into that kind of Google Glass concern area where people don't think the utility is there, so they start just using it for music and timers. So for us, we're rushing with our partners and we're saying, not only is this a gap that needs to be filled, but it's an opportunity for you. So we think that the opportunity and where it goes is when everyone fills in these content gaps and then the platform becomes a real knowledge resource, then we're really doing something. And I also think that we just haven't even thought of the use cases yet. Like, there's an analogy we talk about where the most popular apps when the iPhone came out were like a lightsaber app that made lightsaber noises and a fart noise app. There was no Venmo, no Vine, nothing. So we're all here trying to invent that utility for your brand or for our clients. So I think filling in with content and then thinking about those unique use cases that really, endear people to the platforms is what we're going to need.
And I think with having a few companies in the industry doing it really well is going to help as well. So if someone's going and talking to their insurance company or their company and they're getting all the "sorry, I don't understand," maybe it's not totally intuitive when you switch to another insurance company. There's going to be a lot better. So I think having just the whole industry, the whole space mature and get a little better and more accurate and be able to respond. And I think in the future, it's everything's just going to be on demand. As you talk through Alexa being built into cars and all the other appliances, microwaves, all your home security. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that's just going to be on demand. I think it's going to be figuring out how we make useful things of that in each of our industries.
So I think you guys touched on it. Maturity of the industry is really important to us. Being that we're one of the first nonprofits that are moving into this space, it was very strategic, right? We don't necessarily live or die on the ability to stand up these channels for these bots, but 2 years from now, we may need to. And given that a lot of our use cases address life-saving situations, right? Alerting people about disasters, trying to get people to donate blood, that type of thing, we can't afford to play catch-up, so we would rather be in the position that we're very early, right, with low adoption while the industry is still catching up, then wait for the industry to actually mature, have wide adoption, say, oh my gosh, we have to get an Alexa skill to donate blood right away, right? And then we scramble to do so, and then we're beat out. When we go around to those who are, looking at our skills, really excited about it, the chatbots, they all really say, this is super cool, this is super fun, but I don't really use my Alexa, I don't really use my Google Home for anything other than music and my alarm clock, right? And there's not a lot that we can do about that, at least from an organizational lens, other than push our own good content out. I will say, I really wish that they would handle accents better, because there's so many situations where they say, oh, this is great, but didn't understand my name, and there's lots of times where they say, well, can it do this, can it do that? Well, no, Alexa can't do that yet, Google can't do that yet, so our hands are sort of tied there.
It's integration, right? So my company has done natural language processing for 10 years, and they're back to the whole financial services writers, right? Like, that was not fun content to read. But we have another part of the company that focuses on education, and they create excellent videos, or like Investopedia. So how do you take so many disciplines of content and information and crucial learnings about your financial future, and how do you integrate that into every moment in someone's life? You can't, because nobody's thinking about their financial literacy when they're 22 years old. Like, nobody's thinking, oh man, I really need to be ready when I'm 75. Or if you are, you're really ahead of the game. So how do we integrate it into such a way that it's seamless and that you start to take being better and smarter about what you do with your finances into your life? And that comes back to the making our content entertaining, interesting, but also integrating it into every possible place we can integrate it for our customers, which is why we have integrated into every channel that we can, even in ones in China and WeChat, because we know that those customers want that information, and they don't necessarily want to wait to talk to a person or to go on the web or to do it in traditional channels. So it's really about integrating into their lives as much as we possibly can.
One thing that we're thinking about as well is to not forget about kids, right? Have you ever put an Alexa skill in front of a kid versus, a 22-year-old versus somebody who's elderly, right, who might be a little uncomfortable? It's a radically different behavior that you'll see. And I don't think we talk enough about the market for kids and building skills that are game or education focused. So we haven't quite figured that out yet, but that is one thing that we're thinking of. Don't always think of your typical user. Try to push against that, and maybe there's an opportunity for somebody who might be an earlier adopter than your typical constituent.
Yeah, we had a conference, we host the Superbot conference each year, so back in April we had the folks from BBC Kids present, and it was pretty fascinating how they went about that. I think, I forget the exact question, but the device would start out like, who do you want to play with? And it was open-ended, and then kids would say mom and dad and all sorts of random stuff. And so they'd have to do a little bit leading. Do you want to play with character X? Like that kind of stuff. So it was pretty interesting. I appreciate you guys all taking the time. I thought we could open up to some audience questions if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that, I think voice technologies and chat technologies are right now really in its infancy. What we haven't talked about is a lot of gaming, and so you started to touch on that. Gaming will probably be a big one.
Yeah, like Alexa and those have some in-app purchases, so that we do see, some, at least on the startup side, the games seem to be doing.
Picking up, but
Yeah.
I think we haven't explored the potential.
Yeah, I think some of the things that need improvement are monetization opportunities, attribution, discovery. A lot of folks don't even realize these things are called Alexa skills or Google Actions. That's, yeah, when we ran a survey around that, and that was kind of interesting finding.
We can build chatbots, but we can't work microphones. So on the gaming front, one of the things that we're thinking about as a potential challenge is games are varsity level conversation design, right? When we're building a use case for scheduling a donation appointment, it's very simple, kind of dry, right? Where do you want to do it? What time? What type? Is it plasma or blood? Blah, 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 right? And you can warm that up and make it friendly. But having a conversation design that is truly engaging to a child or in a way where you actually feel like you're playing a game, I think is a very big lift in addition to all of the things that are inherently challenging with bots. But I agree, I think that that's something that we shouldn't be ignoring.
I, to be honest, I like to use the chatbot once I start using that. And normally I use the chatbot and start a conversation when I have the technical glitch, like suddenly that I wasn't expecting. So let's say, I try to like push the check-in button, but it doesn't work. So I start conversation directly with the chatbot because it's on the same page, like on the app, so it's easier. But they recognize and acknowledge my problem and like responds quite like quickly, but it doesn't solve anything. Like she gave me the link that how I can get into at that moment, but generally it seems she doesn't really have the conversation to the technical or the engineers who should really fix it fundamentally. So like in that case, you like sort of maybe the internal communication, but do you have any situation, or do you ever acknowledge, like there's still problems there that hasn't been solved? Because that's my case.
I think it's pretty early in this space. That's what some of the folks are talking about. We see customer service as one of the biggest areas. So some folks are basically just taking their FAQ knowledge base and it's just a search. But the ones that are getting better are making it more conversational so it understands what the person's asking and try to respond appropriately, but it's still early.
So what we do actually is, because we have images in a lot of ours, our agents can see the entire conversational flow. But I'm also financial services, so they have to be covered by Series 7, 64, and 24. So they have to kind of know, like they need to understand the financial services space. So I mean, like my industry requires that anybody who answers the phone to talk to you can actually help you, right? They're not just going to give you a link. So there's that, right? Like that's inherent to the training to the people in our call centers. But they can monitor and watch what you're doing to see how they can help you. You're right though, getting that internal communication is really difficult because you have to handle organizational change, you have to handle behavior change, you have to handle culture change, and sometimes you have to handle time shift change, right? So, and language. So, and then you also have the language, right? So you're handling so many sets of change, you have to recognize that internally your teammates have to come with you. Like you have to get them there and you need to give them time so that the client experience can actually be like, oh, here, there's something seriously wrong with your record locator number. Let me just check you in, right? That's really what you need.
That's true.
And I thought where she was going with that too would be, so you could have, build a question for how do you, fix the check-in, or how do you, what do you do when this happens? But if you're not fixing the underlying issues, so like, 200 people could be asking that same question. Maybe you should be asking the question yourself as a company, like, so why do we have 200 people asking this question? Like, is it poor design? Is there some actual bug we need to fix? So you can drive system improvements based on usage.
Maybe take one more question.
Brandon, I remember before you were talking about the context of the conversation, other than like first time use or where they entered the conversation based off of maybe where they last left the conversation, what other cases do you use context for?
I mean, there's probably a million ways you could slice it, but certainly how many times they've been there, you mentioned, what intents they've triggered in the skill, in the flow that you're currently in. So how many different branches can you create in the conversational tree to filter people into a customized place? And then if they're here for a second, third, fourth, or fifth time, then retain the context of what they did last time they were here, right? So shorten up intros, shorten up interstitials, and there's also external data, right? So if I'm logged into an account, I can peer into all of that data that's coming from your subscription or from your member profile, right? If I'm doing a consumer experience, we can look to external data on what day is it, what time is it, what's the weather outside, what's the stock market look like. We did an experience for FanDuel, which is a fantasy sports organization, and the conversation had 25 different states based on what day it was, what time it was it a game day, was it game night, was it in-game, was it pre-game, was it post-game, what was the weather outside, was it a home team, an away team. So think about all the variables that could affect my experience, and then plan for that. Don't make it overcomplicated to where you break the thing or you can't build it, but think about all the variables around that user experience.
Well, I appreciate you guys all doing this. I think folks will still be hanging around if you have other questions now, but thanks again for being part of this.